Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Coffee with Cory. I'm your host, Cory Smith. Just realized I'm going to say that twice now on this podcast, but I wanted to do something a little bit different than what we've done in the past. I wanted to go ahead and intro the interview before we throw it up here. But just to let people know, this was not a live one. This was a recorded one. But we did sit down with Evan Miyakawa of evanmiya.com, broke down NC State's roster, out of what NC State's looking for in the transfer portal, what type of things NC State fans and, look, man, like national people should be looking for in the transfer portal too, how to balance all those things. We also talked about specific roster players for NC State like Quadier, Copelan, like Darien Williams, and then Paul McNeel as well. So we did all those different things. I'm going to throw that interview up here so everybody can enjoy it. Thank you guys for jumping on. I'll also just kind of, give some feedback to in the comments if you guys want to give your thoughts. We won't be able to throw those up on the screen, but just want to let everybody know that we will have those as well. So I'll throw that up now. Thank you to everybody for listening. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Coffee with Cory. I'm your host, Cory Smith, Pack Power editor, here with Evan Miyakawa of evanmiya.com. And it is, you didn't have coffee with you at the time. I should have, preferenced that beforehand and said something about it, but you do have coffee bags all over the back wall there. So it is always coffee with Evan, right?
Yeah, I'm always drinking coffee. And even though I don't have a mug in my hand right now, you can see my wall behind me displays all of my favorite coffee bags from different roasters around the country. So big coffee guy here.
That's perfect, man. That's perfect. All right. Well, let's jump straight into things. So obviously, for those who don't know, evanmiya.com, that's your website. It's high in analytics. Obviously, it's something where, if you're looking for kind of like a background on a player, you're looking for specifics on a team, you can go there. How did it all start, first of all? And just, where has it kind of evolved to, and how much have you seen the game, from probably 10 years ago to this point, not only at the NBA level, but at the college level too, shift to analytics?
Well, I've always been a college basketball guy. I grew up in Indianapolis, and so, in the heart of college basketball country, my roots actually goes back to, I was a big Butler fan growing up, and I was at the Duke Butler national title game in Indianapolis when Gordon Hayward almost had that half-court shot that went in. That was a very core memory for me growing up that cemented, college basketball as, being my favorite sport. But you fast forward, I ended up getting my PhD in statistics, and I just started applying what I was learning in school to sports, and specifically college basketball. And that's how Evan Miyakawa, or evanmiya.com, started as just kind of a fun side project for me, as I was just trying to learn how to rank teams and players and stuff like that. And ended up just started organically growing to the point where lots of fans and coaches were using it and reaching out to me. And I ended up working for a company, a sports analytics company that did consulting with NBA teams at the time. So I was doing that for a couple of years until I went full-time with evanmiya.com. But it's basically reached the point where, the level of adoption of analytics in basketball, and specifically college basketball, has just continued to grow year over year. I've especially seen that a lot in regards to recruiting, because of the fact that not only are you trying to figure out who through the portal is good, but also who can I get that's worth the money? Because now it's not just like, I want to try and get the best player I can. It's, I want to try and get the best player I can that fits within our budget. So it becomes even more important to be efficient in the way that you are using your resources. And that just naturally lends itself to using more objective tools like what I have at evanmiya.com to help aid you in that process. And so it's been really cool to see. And, obviously it's, my work is now widely used by coaches all over the country. And so I'm very thankful to the Lord for it. Honestly, it's a dream scenario for me, and been really cool to see.
All right. So speaking of those specific player ratings, I think most people would be surprised if you told them before the year that Quadier Copelan would be ranked, I believe right now, number 33 in your rankings. So a guy that, 2 years ago was trying to figure out, where am I going to go? What am I going to be able to do to just be able to kind of get my game to flourish? Goes to McNeel State last year with Will Wade, comes over with him. And I think a lot of people kind of thought, okay, well, he's just kind of bringing him over. This is going to be a guy that's going to come over and maybe have some success at NC State, come off the bench. No, he's the full-fledged starter. He's a starting point guard. He's getting his opportunities. And we're couldn't have been talking at a more perfect time because you're coming off of a game where he just had 16 assists to 0 turnovers to 10 rebounds to 7 points, 3 points away from a double-double or a triple-double. First of all, just your thoughts on his game and what makes him the number 33 overall player, but also how big of is that type of game in the analytics world for kind of boosting his stock too?
Well, sure. I mean, it speaks to the fact that you already had this guy on your roster on your previous team, and you didn't have to. You basically already have him in house, and you've been with him. You know how good he can be, and I think even with the most optimistic expectations, he has far surpassed that this year. You mentioned it. He's a top 35 player in the country, according to Bayesian performance rating at evanmedia.com, which basically measures how valuable are you to your team on offense and defense. If you go ACC specific, he's top 5. And specifically, it's really his statistical efficiency that really sticks out to me. So one of the metrics I have on my site is box BPR, which is basically my own version of box plus minus, if people are familiar with that. It basically looks at all of your box scores across your season, accounting for who you played, and basically says, how good is your stat line? How good of a player does that indicate you are? He's third in the ACC in box BPR behind, just Cameron Boozer and Caleb Wilson. So I've been extremely impressed with him. I mean, you just rattle off his stat line here per game. 14 points a game, 7 assists, 3.5 rebounds, almost 2 steals a game. He's been really efficient from the floor, especially from 3. He doesn't take a ton of threes, but he's making almost 50% of them. And one of the thing that sticks out to me the most is, as you mentioned, what we saw in that last game, his playmaking ability is almost unmatched in the country. On my site, I have projections and skill grades for all of these different areas. And in the playmaking department specifically, he's in the 99th percentile. He has the best assist grade of any player in the ACC. So on paper, what he's doing statistically is really important, but then you say, okay, is he actually having a good impact on NC State's performance as a team? The answer is unequivocally yes. His on-off splits are incredible. NC State is basically outscoring opponents by 20 more points per 100 possessions when Copelan is on the floor versus on the bench. So his individual stats are impressive. He's also incredibly vital to the team performance. So you look at the whole package, he's been unbelievable.
Yeah, and I was going to say, too, I think just looking at the box BPR, too, he was ranked, I believe, number 19 in the country in that statistic, too. So that's just, again, surprising, maybe at the beginning of the season. Now at this point, after watching him for the entire year, it's been unreal to see what he's been able to do. Another guy that's ranked extremely high on your list as an all-around player, but more so on the offensive side of the basketball. I believe he's number 2 in the ACC offensively is Paul McNeel Jr., a guy that ranks number 66 overall or 65 overall in the country, but is inside the top 25 when it comes to offensive BPR. Just your thoughts on his game and how much it's developed in the first year under Will Wade.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. He's been one of the best offensive players in the conference, arguably the best outside of Cameron Boozer. He's got the same thing that Copelan does in the sense that he also has incredible impact on team performance. So you have to give him credit for that. He's been very vital to team success there. But it's really he's a flamethrower from deep. I think I have him as a top 5 3-point grade in the ACC. So basically saying who are the best shooters in the conference? He's in that conversation as one of the best. And the fact that he's shooting, it's very rare for a player to shoot consistently over 40% from 3 on the volume that he's taking. He's taking 7 threes a game. And he's shown the ability in games too. If nothing else is clicking, he can take over. Obviously, he scored almost 50 points in a game earlier this season, but he's had several other outings when he scored 28 points, 27 points. And then maybe an underrated quality to his game that I love, he never turns the ball over.
Yeah.
At all. If you look at every single player in the ACC conference in terms of their turnover grade on my website, basically saying how often are you going to commit turnovers, just kind of going forward as we grade you as a player, he's the best in the entire conference. And that's not typical for, oftentimes that's a quality you would have for a rim running big who almost never has the ball in their hands. But that's not the kind of player that he is. they're giving him the ball plenty, and he never turns the ball over. So that is a really great quality as well, that he can make shots and he's not making mistakes. So he's been a huge part of NC State's success that they've had this year.
Yeah, he just had his first turnover the other night, actually against in that game on Tuesday night. And the surprising part of it, it was against SMU. It was actually a swing pass. He was expecting, I can't remember who it was supposed to be in the corner there. He's expecting him to be there, but he actually drove, came around behind him. So when he made the pass, he just looked immediately, was like, oh no. So that was his his only turnover in ACC play through 9 games so far. That's a pretty remarkable, or through 10 games so far. That's a pretty remarkable number for him. Another guy that's kind of slid just outside of the top 100 now at this point, but Darien Williams, a guy that going into the season, I know you had really high expectations for. I think you had him as your number 1 player coming out of the portal this past offseason. Just your thoughts on his game, what we've seen so far in ACC play, and kind of how you measure that, because obviously I think a lot of people are seeing the last 3 games, it's been 20 plus points for him. How is he sliding further back in the rankings as opposed to moving up? Well, the assist numbers haven't been there. He's turned the ball over quite a bit here in the last few games. How do you kind of balance those things, and just your thoughts on Darien Williams and the season that he's put together too?
Yeah, obviously it's been disappointing from Williams. I think when you're bringing him in as being hopefully the face of the team, a potential player in the preseason you're thinking could win ACC Player of the Year, potentially be a first-team All-American, that sort of thing. And yeah, the consistency there from him, just really hasn't been there in the same way. He's still been very good. I mean, like, you just look at his stat line: 15 points per game, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, 44% from the field, 43% from deep, 80% from, like, these are all things that a leading player on your team, that can be what they're giving you. But we know that Darien Williams is capable of much more than that. I think we saw a lot of that in Texas Tech's biggest moments last year, especially in the tournament, where he, as kind of a bigger point guard, if you will, someone who's able to lead the offense and facilitate and run everything through him when you need it, or play off ball and dominate whoever's guarding him. Like, he's capable of all of that. Part of what goes into BPR is not just measuring how good you've been in a given season, but actually predicting how good you're going to be going forward. Mm-hmm. I think you can make the argument that I think ranked in the ACC right now, Darien Williams is 17th in BPR. Mm-hmm. I think you can make a case that he's not been top 20 good in the ACC, just in terms of like what he has given the team so far this season. But BPR is also predicting how good you're going to be going forward. And there is a track record with Darien Williams, what we've seen at Texas Tech, that shows what he's capable of. And so he still gets a lot of credit in my model, and basically saying like, hey, this is still going to be a very valuable player going forward. And maybe though he doesn't rate as the top player in NC State right now, he's still close. And a lot of it's like, hey, there is more that this guy can accomplish than what he's done. He's still a very capable 3-point shooter. He's still been good in that department. And there are other areas that I know he can step up. So that's the hope, is that, it's been a little under the level that expected from him, but he's still capable of more.
Yeah, and I was going to say one area too for him that can obviously progress is, he has been kind of that, point forward for them at times. He's taken a little bit of a step back from that here recently. And it feels like if he kind of gets back into some of that role, obviously Quadier Copelan eating up a lot of space there. But if he gets back to that role a little bit with a little bit more of the inverted pick and roll, maybe that progresses those numbers too. And that all kind of brings me to the aspect of like, how much have you seen things kind of change for NC State over the last year since Will Wade took over? Because, I mean, we're talking about, a team that under Kevin Keatts for the last several years has been lucky to have one player inside of the top 100. Now you're talking about, oh, it's disappointing that Darien Williams isn't in there. To have 3 players inside of the top 100, like the only guy that's made it in recent years inside of the top 100 was Terquavion Smith back several years ago. TJ Warren in the early years, you had him inside the top 25. And then I think it was, I want to say it was like the year prior, it was Lorenzo Brown was also in there. So how much have you seen kind of the system change under Will Wade in year 1 too?
Well, I mean, obviously there's a lot of big differences. I don't necessarily know if I point to just one, but for starters, the roster is just a lot better than what it's been previously. And, I think that was one of the things I was excited about most for NC State. I am always very reserved and conservative with my expectations for any first-year coach, even a coach that's as good as Will Wade and has as good of a track record as he has in helping his teams outperform expectations or what they're working with. So I think from a roster standpoint of all the first-year head coaches that were coming into this season, I think I was probably just as excited about NC State's possibilities and certainly their roster construction than any of those other teams. But I wasn't necessarily piling a lot of pressure in myself for Will Wade to have a top 15 team in his first season. Certainly he could, but like more often than not, first year coaches can struggle a little bit to be like in at the top echelons of the sport, to win conference titles at the high major level, things like that. You know, you go down the road just a little bit, and Virginia has really struck gold in first year with Ryan Odom. But I don't necessarily look at that and be like, why couldn't NC State have done that? Because like, it's just hard. And like next year, this could flip. Like NC State could be much better than Virginia. I mean, we have seen this with Kentucky and Louisville, where they had very good first years with their Mark Pope and Pat Kelsey last year, especially given the circumstances they were dealing. And then they go into season 2 and they're both expecting to be top 10 teams, and they have come nowhere near that. And so, you know, getting a regular steady performance from your team for a new head coach can be challenging. So all of that considered, yes, maybe NC State hasn't quite reached the ceiling that some people thought, but they've still been very good this season. They're still on track to, be in the NCAA tournament and I think the encouraging thing for me is that I think they were a better team than what their results have showed so far this year. I think I have them around at like an 8 seed in terms of what they've done according to their resume, but they're a much better team than that in terms of my predictive analytics. I have them as a 22nd in the country. So I think that they have the capability to actually have a really strong close to the season, especially in some of their tougher ACC games, and to really, that kind of be on a roll going into the tournament. I think that's the hope, and I think this team is good enough to get there.
Yeah, I was going to say I didn't see you predict NC State early on in the non-conference as far as a seed, but I don't think many people were able to predict what they were going to do because, again, you go back to Maui and it was like, oh, man, they're going to make a run on Maui. They didn't. You come home, they win a few games, and then you lose to Kansas and you lose a couple other games in the non-conference. It changes the kind of idea of what this team can eventually be. So, but all right, let's go. I wanted to ask you specifically because one thing that's been happening a lot here lately is people kind of going, all right, Trey Holloman's in the starting lineup, but I really like what we're getting from Terrence Arsenault. I really like what Matt Abel's doing off the bench. You know, you've got a little more size in Matt Abel. You've got a little more size in Terrence Arsenault, but what are your thoughts on the kind of value of those three players and what should ultimately happen here, as far as a NC State specific lineup data?
Well, I think, obviously there is never one exact combination that typically is the best for a team. I think I big picture, when I look at this roster, the top three are those three players we talked about, Copeland, McNeel, and Williams, and those three are comfortably rated the highest on my site. And then you have a group of 5 players in Van Allen, Lubin, Matt Abel, Sagnia, Arsenault, and Trey Holloman, who are all kind of in a next tier there, who are your next reliable contributors. And then Dang and Breed are a little bit below that, but have played, helpful minutes here and there. And so oftentimes when it's a kind of a breakdown of this, it's like, generally speaking, those top 3 should be on the court most, if not all the time in our big moments. And then you're trying to figure out the other combinations that work with that will lead to the most success. In general, when I look at this team in terms of their lineup data and what's been working, the starting lineup, which is played by far more than any other lineup, has been overall like pretty good and stacks up pretty well with the rest of this roster. There is one lineup that has been really, really good in limited minutes that I predict to also be pretty efficient going forward. And that lineup is with Darien Williams, McNeel, and Copeland, and then Abel and Sagnia. Mm-hmm. Those 3 have played only about half a game, a little bit more than half a game, but they have been blowing opponents out in those minutes that they've played. And so I'd be interested to see that. I've looked a little bit at some of just the teammate chemistry stuff. And if you look at the top teammates on this team that basically really elevate their play when they're on the floor together, the top chemistry on this team, that duo is Quadier Copeland with Sagnia. They have played really well on the court together. So in general, that's an ingredient that I want to see more for this team. There's a lot of different ways this team can go. And to be honest, when I look at lineup data, oftentimes when I pull up a team, there will be a lot of stuff that sticks out to me as like, oh, wow, that's a lineup they've played a lot that's really bad, or this lineup that they've played, they haven't played a lot, but it's been really good. I've not seen a lot of that with NC State. In general, I would say they're pretty close to the mark in terms of the rotations they should be doing. So these things are kind of nitpicks in my opinion, but those are some things that stuck out to me.
Yeah, I was going to say offensively, if you're looking at the metrics here, I think you had Matt Abel at number 55 overall in the ACC, whereas the other guys that we've talked about, all three of them in there, and then Vinal Lubin at number 45 in the ACC. So again, I kind of keep going back to, I've said it on my podcast multiple times. I'm like, if I'm going to make a switch here, I think, the more reliable offensive guy is probably Matt Abel. And we've heard Will Wade say over and over again, I'd rather have an offensive lineup and then have to figure out the defense as opposed to the other way around. So we'll see ultimately what he ends up doing down the stretch. Last two I had for you, though, I wanted to ask you specifically, how valuable can analytics be? We've heard Will Wade talk about it a little bit, the fact that they'll have a little more time in the portal this offseason. Just your thoughts on how valuable those analytics can be for teams trying to go out in the portal and finding immediate value.
My philosophy with this has always been you shouldn't completely blindly trust data, and you shouldn't completely throw it out. It's somewhere in the middle. The best, most accurate place that you can be as a coach or evaluator in terms of understanding the full picture of things and making good decisions is when you combine your own expert knowledge as a coach, as an evaluator, watching film, that sort of thing, with objective tools like what I have at evanmia.com and other data analytics and things like that are not biased or not leading you in a certain direction. They're just telling the story based on what it sees. And combining those two gets you to the most informed place. I think that is an attitude that Will Wade and his staff have shown over the last couple of years, both this year and in previous years, of being able to say, like, we trust our own gut instinct, but we're also going to then validate that with data and see where that leads us. And oftentimes that just means you're not going to make as many mistakes or big misses on evaluations. Oftentimes the way that I see teams best using data to analyze the portal or roster additions is not necessarily saying like, oh, this guy has a high rating, therefore we just need to get this guy and don't ask any questions about it. It is often building a short list of guys who are all going to be within a criteria of something that makes sense for you. So for example, if you're like, hey, we really need a wing who can shoot next year, rather than only just watching film or just saying like, hey, who have we played this year who is good? Or rather than just blindly trusting and saying, well, here's the top rated guy, this is the guy we should get, and he's ranked slightly better than this other guy, so we shouldn't consider him. It's building a list of saying, like, here are the guys who fit what we're looking for stylistically and maybe in terms of personality and what we want on this team. And then here is everyone kind of within that who is in this upper tier of where they are rated according to the analytics. And that way, if we grab any of these guys, they're all predicted to be high impact players for us. And we're not going to end up doing a bad eval. And we end up grabbing a guy who looked great on film, but actually doesn't really stack up on paper. And that is how a lot of the best programs build their rosters, is by doing that together. So that's generally speaking what I've often seen be successful for teams.
Yeah, because I was going to say, it's kind of like trying to balance. You're trying to balance three different things. Obviously, what you're seeing on film. So you're trying to balance the eye test here. You're trying to balance the analytics, but also how they fit with the team and where you think those guys can fit in. Because it's like, all right, we've got three great 6'6" guys. Are we going to take all of them, or are we going to try to take one or two of them and then go out and try to get a 6'10" guy who maybe has similar skill set but gives us more size? How that's the last thing I had for you too, was just kind of how do you balance the analytics with the eye test for players and what you see on film or what you see on the court with them too?
I think oftentimes if a coaching staff is looking at a player and they're like, okay, his numbers are really, really good, but I don't like this aspect of his play, or I don't think he's very good. It's often not necessarily that player actually stinks. It's that whatever you value as a coaching staff in a player, it's not a good fit. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes you shouldn't just ignore those things of like, well, the metrics say this guy is great, but I'm very like, I think this area of his game is very problematic and I don't know if that would work. Oftentimes that means, yeah, that player may not work for you. He may be a good fit for someone else. So you shouldn't like I said before, you kind of got to thread the needle there. And, ultimately it goes the other opposite direction as well, where sometimes the staff is able to find a guy where they're like, hey, the numbers aren't great on this guy, but I really think he fits. And sometimes those players do work, but it often means that it's a not necessarily as likely to be a home run for that player as if you can find another guy who you also like as much on film, but also stacks up really well according to the numbers and the objective tools that you can use to evaluate a guy. So it's not an exact science. And I think as we've seen this year, a lot of teams even did press going into the season of like, we have this really sophisticated system for evaluating players and look how great we did. And then their season has turned out to be kind of hit or miss. So people are still figuring it out, and there's no perfect way to do this, but I've seen a lot of success in combining both the data and what you're seeing on film or what your own kind of gut feel about a guy tells you.
I was going to say, it's also kind of how much are you willing to, say, all right, this guy isn't a fit in our system. Are we willing to change our system? You saw that. Kevin Keats is a pretty good example of that with DJ Burns for multiple years there. That's not something that he usually runs in his system, but it was like, hey, this guy is a home run for us and somebody that can change the entire game for us. How much are you willing to kind of change about your system? All right, last thing for you, Evan, before we let you roll out of here, where can people find all of your work? I know evanmia.com, obviously down there at the bottom, but where can they find you in other places too?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you can find the links to everything at evanmia.com, the links to all my socials and stuff. The one thing I will plug the most is I have started a new weekly college basketball show this year called the Evan Mia College Basketball Show. Episodes are coming out on Tuesdays, and basically it's a weekly college basketball show that recaps a lot of stuff going on the weekend. It's got a bit of an analytics flair, but it is not a hardcore analytics show. I have a lot of other big time national media guests coming on with me each week. I've had John Fanta, Jeff Borzello. I had Fran Fraschilla join me this last week. So if people, if your listeners are looking for more regular college basketball content, be sure to check that out. You can find links to that on evanmia.com.
Yes, sir. Well, Evan, I really appreciate it. And for Evan, for Coffee with Cory, I appreciate everybody for jumping on. We'll talk to you guys again soon.